Greetings! Tony from Old River Hardgoods again. Well, the music you're listening to is Devil Under the Table from my first CD, Forgotten Walls. And as always, there's a link to the full version and a video I made of it. That one still has the beard down there in the description. And today's video, we are going to be firing up the old Tony time machine to take a look at a most extraordinary box of tools I acquired a long time ago. Actually, about 6-7 months before Devil Under the Table was written. Yeah, that old. And anyways, as well as what I know a little bit about the history of the tools and their previous owner. So, sit back and maybe you'll learn something, right? Well, our little tale here starts in July of 2006. When I made a trip to a fairly big antique show and walked around for a couple of days. Didn't really find much. Got a few things, but on the last day I was there, I was in one field and folks were still setting up, and this one guy had a toolbox sitting out front. Him and his son, well, not really a kid, but he was a 20-ish guy. Anyways, they were unloading furniture and that, and I walked up and looked at the toolbox. Now the pictures you're seeing were taken later, but anyways, looked at the box, opened it up, looked around inside, looked at the contents a bit, and asked the price. And he came back with a number that wasn't too bad. And I said, well, I'll think about it, and closed the lid. Slowly walked away because I didn't want to attract too much attention from anybody else that might be after such items at this place. But I got about 6-7 steps away, and he yells back with a price that's $50 less, and something inside of me said, you got to do it. So I did. So I had him and the kid move it back under his truck for the time being, and then when things quieted down, I recruited the kid in his hand truck to help me transport it back over to my truck and brought it back to civilization, and this is what I have found inside. Well, then I started pulling some of the stuff out once I got back to civilization before I moved it into the shop. And well, I didn't mention this, but that was one heavy box of tools. My guess, all said and done, it was close to 70 pounds. Of course, back in those days, I was a bit more on the fit side, and these days, no way in heck would I try dealing with something like that, at least without some mechanical intervention. And you can see the hammers, calipers, tongs, and all sorts of neat stuff in there. I mean, it was just a veritable gold mine. But if you notice that black stuff there, here's a little better shot. Keep in mind, these were shot with a 2006 era digital camera, you know, the kind of use I still have to take to the drugstore to get the pictures developed on. Old blonde joke there. But anyways, that black stuff is coal tar. Not cosmoline, not paint, coal tar. Google it. I mean, that stuff was right nasty. And my regular paint stripper wouldn't even start the budget. I tried it on a couple pieces and it was like, oh my word. So I went out and got some extra heavy duty industrial strength paint stripper, along with a pair of extra heavy duty rubber gloves, because that stuff was really nasty, and started cleaning. And after a few, test runs of this and that I had on the thing, it just, using the heavy duty stuff to loosen most of the gunk off, and then I could take it over to the other stripper and then clean it off with a little bit of the regular stripper to finish it up, and then took it over. I guess, I was using the wheel by then. I was polishing the stuff up on the wheels and getting the gunk and stuff off the handles, refinishing the handles like I usually do. There's plenty of videos out there on how I do all that. And that was it. I spent 40 hours just doing the hammers, a good 40 hours on the stakes, plus the machinist tools and everything else that was in there. And let me tell you, I earned my money on this batch. But anyways, let's move on with the story. Let's talk about the man. The story actually begins in the end of January in 1945. There were newspapers in the bottom of the toolbox from January 26th and January 27th, from when he packed up his tools and put them away for the last time. But one of the tools I pulled out of there was a small square made of German silver, little tri-square, hand-ruled, and with a name on it. Henry Jarvis of Newburyport, of course that would have been Massachusetts, dated May 2nd, 1900, probably an apprentice project. Note the J stamp. That followed him around for a long time, although I did not get it. I wish I had, but did not find it. But anyways, you can see the engraving. And this gave me a clue. Unfortunately, there weren't too many other clues to be found, because I have not been able to find anything about this guy. No obituary, nothing. So I even went on a one genealogy website board, Jarvis family area, and put up a information wanted, and never really got any replies that I can recall. So I think one gal said he was her great uncle or something like that, but that was led to nothing. So, but one of the other things I found in there was this sweepings pan. Silversmiths, like just about every other metalworking trade, would collect the sawdust and the remnants from the end of the day, and they would go into a container and be transferred back to the melting pot. Waste not, want not. You see it's got a spoon handle of some kind on here. It was made out of copper. And you can see the engraving on it. And of course that J and Henry, and of course it got some stain and funky on it, This thing had 40 plus years worth of use on it, probably. But, on the back, more engraving and stuff like that. I mean, it wasn't the fanciest tool made. After I sold all the other stuff, I did keep both that tri-square and this sweepings pan for a number of years until I finally decided to get rid of them. I just, it was a neat little memento, but then it was time to move them on to a new home. And I think I know the guy that bought the pan. I forget who bought the square, but I think I know who bought the pan. But anyways, that's all I could find about old Henry. Although, okay, back up here. I do know that he worked for Towle, Towle Silver Crafters. At one point, they were Towle Manufacturing and Towle Silver Crafters in Newburyport, or in Newbury, Massachusetts. I don't know where I came up with that, but somewhere I found that. So that's pretty good information. And the guy was there for 45 plus years. You know, how many people can get a job and last that long at it these days? But anyways, so that's it for the man. Now it's time to start taking a look at the tools. Now, the moment everybody's been waiting for, the tools. All total, there were 31 hammers in there, 26 silversmiths, 3 cross peens, regular cross peens, 1 small straight peen, and 1 silversmith's hammer that was pretty well destroyed. I don't know why he decided to save it, but he did. So we're going to just take a quick look at some of them. I'm not going to bore you with pictures of all of them. If you want, I'll point you to the webpage where I got all this stuff listed on. But anyways, here's some of the examples. And you can see they all cleaned up pretty well. Some really unusual shapes. Handles all have some character to them, but these were the tools of a working man. One of the interesting facets about all this was a lot of the wedges were either silver or German silver, I couldn't tell, and a few of them were even looked to be ivory, which was pretty neat. And my guess is that he purchased these or acquired these hammers from retiring previous silversmiths, because a lot of them were hand forged. I mean, none of these had a manufacturer's stamp on them. And all in all, it's a pretty neat set. I mean, it just, considering the fact that according to my records, I haven't sold a silversmith's hammer since 2023. That's 2 years. That's how hard this stuff to come by. And to come by a pile like this. Matter of fact, the one guy who at the time was the working silversmith down in Williamsburg tried to get them to buy the whole lot of this stuff after I first posted it. And Williamsburg said, no, it's not old enough, but it would have been kind of neat. I have sold other tools down there. But anyways, now we're going to move over to the stakes. Now we're going to take a look at some of the handheld forming tools and stakes tools that he had. Here's a couple examples. Note the J stamp, if you can see it there. I can see it. These are, obviously used, but in, fairly well-preserved condition, considering probably how long he used them. And I'm suspecting that he manufactured some of these himself, unlike the hammers, which he probably would have acquired from other guys. But, it's not inconceivable that a silversmithing company in the early 1900s, however long he was there, we don't want to have a fully operational blacksmithing shop. Many years ago, back in my PC geeking days, I was doing computer work for a drop forging factory that had been founded back in 1898 or something like that. And they still had, and this was back in 1990s, still had a fully operational blacksmithing shop that was running every day until the day the place closed. One of those corporate baron takeover things. But anyways, and here we have a stake set that came out of that box and the holder. Now, these weren't marked. I suspect they might have been Dixon's, but I can't say for sure. But again, I mean, a few dings and bumps, but these guys were really, really nice, and you just don't see this stuff around. Here's a close-up of view of the stakes. So, but anyways, now let's take a look at some of the machinists and other tools that came out of this haul. This is a 3-inch machinist tri-square that was made by Darling and Schwartz of Bangor, Maine. Samuel Darling was granted patent number 18327 on October 6, 1857 for the design of the manufacturing processes used in making this tool. 1857, meaning 1877, expiration of the patent. So, I mean, Very, very old. Well, it's got some wear and stuff like that, but this also was in the box, and this was one of the tools I'm sure he inherited or purchased from somebody else at that particular location. Back in 2006, this was, even in this condition, was a very, very valuable tool. Let's just say I made a lot of money on it. We'll leave it at that. These days, they aren't bringing that much because of the stupidity of certain sellers on eBay who insist on listing everything for $9.99, but you will have this. Anyways, that's a rant for another day. And there were a number of dividers and calipers in there. A couple of early Fay pattern. I don't remember if they were Starretts or whatever. They look like Starretts on the left side there, divider. Missing the spinner. And then there's an outside caliper that has the spinner on the top for some reason. Some of the early ones did have that. Again, I don't remember who it was. And then over here is a T. Hessenbruck. He was if I remember correctly, a Philadelphia or possibly New York importer of German tools. But that also came out of the box. I think he had a couple others of those guys in there. And contrary to popular belief, people actually worked with those tools. And I think they're nice tools. Very collectible, very usable. I've sold a bunch of them over the years, but, again, idiots on eBay giving stuff away. And last up from this miscellaneous batch, no, I shouldn't say that, of the machinist batch, was a standard tool. Little machinist bevel square, and that was actually in pretty good shape. Marked in Ethel, Mass. Standard was a offshoot of Starrett for a while. If I remember correctly. Yeah, he just something old man Leroy Starrett set up on as a side for people who don't want to pay full boat for his regular tools. He set up Standard as a back channel operation. And according to my records, there were 3 hand vices in the box, but this is the only one I could find. I don't know if I pulled the other ones aside or what happened to them. Hey, it was 19 years ago. I'm lucky I remember all this stuff in this kind of detail. But this one was definitely hand forged. I don't know if it was done by old Henry or not, but it does have his stamp all over the place, so it might have been. Of course, he might have worked with a bunch of tool thieves at the time, but I don't have any specs on it either. I didn't dig them out, but still kind of neat. And definitely he's got some character to it, but, hand vices are another one of those tools that I'm just not seeing hardly any of anymore, or they're beat to death, or, got the wrong screws in them, etc., etc., etc. So I even did a video on hand vices. It didn't get a whole lot of attention, but what are you going to do, right? But anyways, this pretty much wraps up the tool section of this, except for we're going to talk about the toolbox in a few minutes, or a few seconds, I should say. I'm coming off of a cold here, in case you can't tell, and my head isn't exactly running on all cylinders. Not that I always do, but anyways, we'll be back in 1 second. And there were a lot of tools that were missing out of this box. There were a few small rules, but nothing like combination squares or larger rulers, and a few odds and ends of punches, but nothing like that. And same for engraving tools and soldering tools. I kind of suspect that there was a second box, but unfortunately that was lost to history. And as to the toolbox itself, well, a guy that I met on eBay by the name of Paul Soburn back in 2004 was traveling through the area. He's from Illinois, and him and his wife were on their way to New Jersey to visit their son, who was with the Coast Guard there, and he stopped by the shop for a fun-filled visit, and he wanted to buy the box, so I sent the box off with him. Newspapers and all, if I recall. And unfortunately, we lost Paul back in 2009. He was dragging around a whole bunch of medical problems, stuff that I wouldn't wish on anybody. And finally, something caught up to him, but yeah, you'll have this. So anyways, that's my tale of the tools. Well, that's it for this one, folks. I hope you enjoyed my little presentation. I hope you learned something. And as always, if you like what you're seeing, please hit that subscribe button to be notified when new videos are posted. As always, thanks for watching, and bye.